Is that recording? There we go, Dave. Oh, we can see it on here, all right. That's perfect on there. Really? Yeah. You alright, guys?
Yeah, very good.
Sit down then, Jim. Welcome back, Davey.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back again. It's great to see so many faces I already know, but even better to see loads of new faces here. So thank you very much for coming out. What I was going to do tonight is do a theme around grading fishing, because we're in the grading fishing season now. I predominantly fish on rivers. That's my main interest really. I do a bit of stillwater fishing when the rivers aren't in very good nick, but I tend to focus just on the river fishing. So I'm going to stick to that tonight. I know there's a lot of river fishermen here. And as we move into the grading season, one of the things about grading is they can be one of the easiest fish to catch on the right day, but at the same place you can go on another day and they can be the most difficult fish to catch as well. So I was going to talk about how we can sort of adapt our flies particularly, and also I can talk about some of the methods that we use to fish for those tricky days when we go to the river and we've heard all the reports of other anglers catching loads of fish and they've told you all the flies they've been using, and you go there, conditions are perfect and they're just really tricky, you just really struggle to find the fish. Now you can be absolutely sure the grading are there. When the water's clear you can often see them in the water. You can see them down there and you can watch their reaction to flies, and you'll find that certain flies will just get no response, but just a slight tiny tweak in either the fly pattern you use, or more importantly usually the presentation of how you present that fly to the fish, will suddenly spark a reaction. And that's what we try and do really. We're trying to sort of unlock that response and not just turn up every day and read the reports, read the magazines, these are the flies you need to use, these are what have worked. Because quite often grayling, particularly, more so than trout, they get very habituated because they're a shoalfish and they can communicate with each other, and you can often find that once one or two fish have been caught in a certain pattern, there's some sort of communication system that goes around, and they will just then switch off and ignore whatever comes down that looks like that. Whereas you switch to something else or a different size or whatever, suddenly one grayling will take it and then the rest of the shoals switch on and you're in again. And this is what sort of competition anglers really try and unlock as well when fishing some of these rivers. But the problem is, a lot of the best grayling rivers, like the Welsh Dee for example, and the other one is the Upper Severn. I think the Upper Severn's really popular this time of year. And it gets fished quite a lot. So the grayling see a lot of flies and they soon become habituated. So I'm going to just sort of talk through a few ways that we can show the fish something slightly different, and the ways that that worked in the past for me. And there's two major themes really. One is sort of working around the size, shape of the fly. So not just using the same size flies that we've used before or what the people have used, but basically how we can alter the size, and also the sort of the colour of the fly as well. They're the two things that grayling sort of really respond to. And I would say particularly size of fly. And as a rule of thumb, if grayling is really tricky, you're fishing a place there's fish there, that they're becoming really tricky, you just can't get a bite. My golden trick is just go small, go really small on your flies, particularly if the water's clear, and just that's the first thing before you worry about anything else. So okay, so the first one I'm going to tie is one that's generally used on the point. So I'm going to sort of work from the bottom of a cast. If you're using a standard nymphing leader and you've got a point fly on the bottom, which is typically the heaviest fly, and then I'll work up the cast on the droppers as well, and also touch on a few dry flies, because you've really got to be prepared to fish dry fly all through the winter really, when it comes to grayling. So this first fly is it's basically a variation of a pheasant tail nymph. It's on a wide gape jig hook, and it's a fairly small jig hook actually. This is a size 18, which is pretty small for a point fly, and I've put a 3.5mm tungsten bead, so it's a heavy bead. It's designed to get down to the bottom of most rivers. I mean, you often have to go heavier on the bead. This time of year, particularly if you're fishing deep water, and there's a lot of extra water pushing through, or it's a big river like the Welsh Dee, for example, 4mm might be needed. But I always try and put the bead on the smallest hook possible, particularly when I know that I'm going to a place that's heavily fished, that has grading that can be really quite picky. So first of all, small is going to be the theme tonight, and grading see a lot of silver, gold, copper beads. That's what people tend to use, and orange beads. People say, oh, grading love an orange bead. They do until they've seen too many orange beads. So, a different colour. This is a purple painted tungsten bead, and it's one that I find really often just gets a response from grading, particularly those that are a little bit timid and sort of shy away from other colours. It's a colour that gets their interest, but it also doesn't really scare them that much. So I'm going to use a black tying silk. It's the standard ultimate tying silk that I use on all my flies. This is available from Fish On Productions on the internet. It's a really good general purpose silk that you can do anything with really, and splits easy, and also, and I'll keep saying this every time, it doesn't need varnish. So when you use these really fine strong silks, unlike using sort of standard tying thread, you don't need to use varnish on these flies, particularly on my river flies. Just want to avoid that as much as possible, both because I like to tie flies really fast. I like to fill my boxes full of flies because you quite often go through a lot of flies in a day on a rough river, and I don't really want to be too fiddling around with varnish and getting it in the dubbing as well, because a lot of these flies are they've got quite mobile materials at their head, and if you put varnish anywhere near it, it just sort of coats it and spoils it. So for the tail of the fly, I'm using Coctalian fibre. This is Ed Madrigal's Coctalian, which I brought this last year, and I've still got the packet going. Bought it from the Stafford Fly Fair last year.
Good lad, Ed.
Absolutely excellent. Really good value as well.
Yeah.
Best quality, but excellent value.
He'll give you a discount if you tell him that he's part of Love of Fly Tying.
He will. So I'm just going to pinch off a little bundle of those. Usually about sort of 5-6 fibres is about ideal, and just sort of match them up so they extend about the same length as the hook shank out the back of the hook, and just attach that with a pinch and loop. Just down to the bend and snip off the waist. And then for the rib of the fly, I'm going to use a medium copper wire. Good trick when you're using wires, particularly when you're tying a batch of flies. Don't just trim off the length that you think will be okay for that fly. Pull a really good length off, because it'll do two things. It will really help you. It helps you work with the rib much easier when you're tying the fly, but also in the long run, when you're tying a batch of flies, say 6 at a time, you actually have a lot less waste, because you've got a lot fewer ends that you're trimming off. So you might think by taking a small bit off your spool each time you're saving on the wire, but it's the opposite. And if you don't use it, you can just leave it in your waste bin until you come back to the vise next time. I quite often have lengths of wires and flosses, but it just really saves all that waste that you don't want. So we'll just tie that in down the length of the body. And then for the main body of the fly, I'm just going to use some pheasant tail. I'm looking at about sort of six to eight fibres. The trick with using pheasant tail is to just make sure it's nice and moist before you start using it. It just saves it breaking off. It just helps preventing it snapping off too much. And what I do is I just offer that up to the hook. Just make sure there's no fibres that are too long. Just offer it up to the hook there with the tips of the fibre, the thin part. Just lay them along the hook shank, and then with a couple of loose turns, you can just attach those fibres to the hook shank. And then once you've done a couple of loose turns, what you can do is you can just pull the fibres gently backwards, just so those fibres pull back. So it just lays along the hook there, and it means you don't have to cut anything off there. You can just now tie that in. Okay. And again, before we start wrapping that body up, I just like to make sure those fibres are quite moist. It also helps you grip the fibres better, because what you don't want to do is just suddenly lose grip of it. You get right to the end there and they just spring back and start again. It's really annoying. So I'm just going to come back up the body with the pheasant fibres, touching turns. And because we've tied it in the thin bits first, as you twist those back at the body, you get a nice tapered body because the fibres get successively fatter as we go up. So it creates a natural tapering effect, which gives that profile of the natural nymph in the water. So I'll do three turns behind, and I like to do 3 or 4 turns just at the front there, just to lock it. Trim that off as close as you can. And then with the copper rib, turn it in open turns the opposite direction to where you've tied your pheasant tail. So what that means is it actually crosses the fibres and it just locks them in properly. If you did it the same way as the pheasant fibres, it would just literally bed in between the fibres, and it wouldn't actually give any reinforcement to it.
Yours.
Snap that off. Never try and cut the wire with scissors because it just totally wrecks scissors. Just needs a little bit of a snap. Okay. Now for the thorax of the fly, I'm just going to use natural grey squirrel, nice and spiky fibres. And that is is all that's needed for this fly. I'm not putting any extra colour into it, I'm not putting any extra features or flash or anything. It's just basically a very, very standard simple pheasant tail. With that coloured bead at the head, it just gives it a little bit of extra traction, but it's quite subtle. And it's not a colour that fish are used to seeing all the time. And if your normal flies, if your normal sort of silver bead flies or copper bead flies, whatever you're using, don't work, then these are the ones to use. And the other time to use this fly is if you've been catching well in one place on these bigger rivers where the grayling tends to form quite large shoals. You can catch a few fish and then it sort of slows down a bit, and you think, well, you know, that there aren't any more fish here. Probably is. There's probably a whole shoal of grayling. They've just stopped. They've just started to ignore what's coming down. So a change fly is always really good. And this is a really, really good change fly for the points. And often gets them feeding again. You'll notice I've just been just picking out some of those fibres. So I tend to dub the squirrel on quite thick at first, but then I'll spend quite a bit of time just sort of picking it out and thinning it out a little bit, and it just creates those leggy fibres that really give a nice bit of movement in the water.
That you go down to that, what would be your starting size? Or would you just put that on?
To be on the point fly,
yeah.
I'd probably use something of a similar size, but I'd use other flies probably to start, like silver beads type fly. There's various flies I use, like purple nasties or other pheasant tails with other colours.
Do you tend to work, I don't know, maybe a 14 to 16?
Yeah. I mean, it's probably start with the larger fly with the same beads, because if the fish are hungry, they're not wary. They will go for a larger fly because it's a bigger food item.
It's a bigger reward.
It's a response to the fish becoming wary, I suppose. They still want to feed, but they just start to get wary, and you're just trying to remove that factor from them. So it's particularly important when you're fishing clear rivers. So like the Welsh Dee, for example, and Upper Severn, they're the two rivers I know really well, and I've seen this happen all the time, that in the clearer water there, the grayling can quickly become quite spooky.
Whereabouts do you fish on the Dee?
So I fish mostly around Llangollen area on the Dee.
Oh yeah, I fish on the
Yeah.
Town.
Yeah.
It's funny, I never really, when I first started going there, I sort of didn't go to town waters because I thought,
Yeah.
but actually there's some of the best stretches, and long reach as well.
Yeah, I mean town water's a classic place where the grayling become quickly habituated because it's really popular.
But I do get what you said about pressure. There's some times I feel as if
yeah.
Especially now, this week especially, it's really fantastic.
Exactly, yeah. Or if you fish second week in December after the Hannock Festival.
Yeah. There's not many left.
So that's just a useful change fly, as I'd call it, if takes sort of dry up or it's a particularly tricky day. Okay.
Oh, learning.
So the next one of the tie is actually one for the dropper. And
what's your preferred method? Grayling, do you Uranimf a lot, or do you do upstream? What do you prefer doing?
Well, prefer dry fly fishing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If anything, but apart from that, I fish mostly sort of Uranimf.
I understand, like, you know, I've got a Uranimf rig and I Uranimf.
Yeah.
But I I don't know whether it's more productive, whether it's enjoyable is up for debate. I don't like the distance of it. It's not fly fishing. I don't know. Perhaps it's just me.
I mean, it's often the only way to catch them is when there's a lot of water in the river and they're tightly shoaled up. It's often makes a difference between catching and not catching. So
there is.
We've only got one. Nice man. You took fishing eels. You're up. When you took fishing eels, the Norwich one. That was a couple of hundred.